Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this talk today. Just saying that we're recording this talk as well, and it will be on YouTube soon. And we're glad to have Alda Terracciano today, and who's going to talk about the dialogical method, oral history, participation, and the digital humanities.
Okay, yeah. Can you see me? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so thank you so much, Patini, for the invitation to be here today and present on the dialogical method. And I'm really pleased also to have two colleagues with whom I worked very recently here, Julian Nyhan and Andrew Flynn. And it's particularly interesting because I will also talk about the Sloan Lab, which is the project we worked on together. It is my hope that today's presentation will contribute to a wider reflection on the distribution and communal ownership of information resources in our technological age, helping us thinking about innovative methodologies that can stimulate democratic forms of knowledge production and help establishing sustainable conditions and collaboration processes that converge and interact with society at large in a dynamic and inclusive way. So that is my hope. Let's see if I will manage. Now, before I move into describing the projects I want to talk to you about, I think it's important also to give you a little background about me, because it might help contextualize my talk and also the theoretical positions I'm going to put forward. I'm an interdisciplinary researcher. Originally, my MA was in art design and visual culture, and then I progressed with a PhD in theater history. So I'm a theater historian, and my original research interest included Black and Asian British theater. I then because I developed my research in the 1990s, last century, when archival resources around this area were quite meager, I would say, then the question of the archive became a really key element, both in the process of reconstructing that history, but also on the impact that my work aimed to make in the general GLAM sector. And so what happened was that in conjunction with the completion of my PhD, in 2001, I co-founded with members of the Black Theatre Forum, where was an umbrella organization of Black, Asian, and Caribbean communities in theatre companies in the UK. I co-founded Future Histories, which was the first independent archive of its kind in the UK. And with these archive, basically, and the members and the board, as well as the wider community, I co-designed and led on pioneering cataloging projects, bringing, for example, catalogs of Black theatre for the first time on the National Archives website. So this was a kind of activist engagement with the field. But at the same time, through Future Histories, I realized the importance of expanding the co-design method and the co-creative method also to other communities in London. And for that reason, in 2010, I set up an organization called the Alda Terra Projects, which whose work is very much based on the cross-fertilization between different disciplines and art forms, and it's interested in exploring the intersection between memory, migration, and immersive digital technologies. Now, why am I presenting this? It's because, in a sense, these past engagements link up very much with the activities I then carried out at the Department of Information Studies, where I was co-leader with Julian and Andrew of the Embracing the Archive cluster for the Center of Critical Heritage Studies, which was a collaboration between UCL and Gothenburg University, which went on for about 6 years. I was PI for Mapping Memory Routes, which is a project I designed to explore the impact of gentrification on London's diverse cultural heritage, and it was supported by the Heritage Rotary Fund, but also UCL Grand Challenges Program and CCHS, and I'll talk more about Mapping Memory Routes. I was then curator of Geographies of Information, which is an online exhibition you can still visit, and it was also a creative learning student program. I worked with Andrew with students, oral history students, to create basically a lasting memory of the DIS centenary. So the centenary obviously was an important moment, and it allowed us to focus on what had been the incredible contribution of the department in the sector of information studies. And so I used oral history, archival research, soundscapes, and 360 immersive environments to create that exhibition. And then, as I mentioned, I was a participatory co-design consultant for the Sloan Lab, and worked with Andrew Flynn in particular to develop mechanisms of basically interaction with the publics, delivering co-design workshops with diverse communities of users to help shaping the digital aggregator that Julian led on. So out of these activities, what I would say is that my key focus and key interest was very much what Jen Schrady, who's a sociologist at Berkeley University, calls the digital production gap. What she talks about is this incredible, she looks at the incredible dissemination and distribution of consumption, especially consumption of digital content. And she says that also there is quite a lot of user-generated content, which is prompted especially by social media. But there is still a gap. There is still a gap in terms of who are the people who can really produce that information, who are the people who have access to digital tools, how the distribution of digital resources works at scale, especially when we look at the GLAM sector. And so in terms of digital inequality from a design and production angle, it becomes really important for us working in the field to look at, to be serious about the challenge of democratizing this access to the production and look at what strategies we can put in place so that we close this digital production gap. We try to, work without following the same frameworks, the existing frameworks of digital consumption, especially those created by social media companies, and therefore look at participation from angles which are different from those that are already dished out to us. That has been my key interest, and that has been really at the core of the activities in a sense that I have carried out both within the department and outside the department. Now, in this context, co-creation of value has really become, from my point of view, a critical, element because it's not just an end product of in the process of knowledge exchange across, different groups of people who might come together and co-create value. But it's also because co-creating value means, first of all, having to identify what value is. And so this identification of what is valuable, and we will talk more about it when it comes to Sloan Lab, is extremely important. So co-creation of value means understanding really what value is and how it can differ across different groups and participants. And also in the process of co-creating value, how do we engage with these disparities? How do we engage with challenges in terms of also motivation, for example, productivity? These are, you know, issues that might be difficult when it comes to, for example, engaging with communities who have been left outside of the production chain. And so for me, in a sense, these are design considerations of great importance if we want to create a digital heritage common. And for me, a digital heritage common is very much a space which, especially in the current climate, where we have an increased access to resources, it's a space for co-creation and a way of imagining cohabitation in a more democratic way. Now, the way I have imagined this co-creation of value in the digital space is through digital intervention, obviously. And these digital interventions have had at their core the aim to create communal ownership of information resources, of promoting creative, active public engagement with heritage, and develop research methodologies that can promote democratic knowledge making. So for me, these have been the pillars in the process. Now, as I mentioned, the presentation today will focus on two projects in particular, where I hope I can elucidate these concepts a bit better. The first is, as I mentioned, the mapping memory routes, which had two iterations. The first one with Moroccan communities in West London, and the second with the Latin communities in North London. And then the Sloan Lab, looking back to build future shared collections project led by Julianne and with Andrew Flynn. And for that one, we engaged diverse communities, including academics, heritage professionals, interested communities, and non-hegemonic communities. Now, with the first project, I basically had, which I developed when I basically completed 2 years of research at Queen Mary University in digital economy. At that time, what became really important for me was to understand how we could develop mechanisms of digital interaction with the sensory modalities to capture the tacit heritage of culturally diverse communities in London. So, whereas with future histories, I dealt with archives, which mainly included documents based, paper-based documents or VHS tapes or sound tapes, the kind of usual material you find. Although those documents referred to performance and therefore intangible heritage, they were still rooted in something that was quite tangible. I had documents I could hold in my hands. When it comes to culturally diverse communities in London and the way they have inhabited the urban space, looking at sensory modalities became really important, because a culture in an area of London would not only be manifested through, for example, printing, publicity material for an event, or it would be also the smell of something that is cooked and that is rooted in that particular culture. It would be the images that you see of objects in a window, right, or in a shop window. It could be the quality of the materials that are sold in a shop and that you can touch. So the haptic, the tactile, the olfactory, the taste, These were also very important elements. And if I wanted to capture the role that diverse communities had played in the making of London and what the impact of gentrification was having in uprooting these communities and changing the face of London, then multisensory heritage was something that I had to deal with. And therefore, it was important to design a methodology that could look into that. At the same time, it was also fundamental, because I was dealing with communities that had obviously, that were obviously in the process of fighting for their real existence in London, in these areas of London. It was important for me to create a methodology where co-production, co-design would very much be at the core and the center of any action as a researcher we would take, as an artist and researcher. And so the invite to communities to co-produce the research process as well as the exhibited content became really important. And I learned how this could strengthen human connections, not only between the researchers and the participants, but also eventually between the communities and those who would interface the outcomes of the research project. Now, mapping memory roots of Moroccan communities, which I said was developed in 2016, 2017, also came at a very critical time in our contemporary history, which is when the bombing that happened in Manchester created a wave of Islamophobia in the country. And therefore, it became really important also to allow community a space to explore their own cultural heritage, to exhibit this cultural heritage, to share it with communities in the UK who might not be aware of it. So it was also a political tool, if you like, or at least engaging in a political arena. For this reason, I decided to work with community centers that were rooted in the Golborne area. Golborne Road is basically in the borough of Kensington and Chelsea, which is the most gentrified in Europe. And you have this road, which is known as Little Morocco. And in this road, you have two community centers. One is the Al Hassaniya Moroccan Women's Project, which works with women who have been have had issues around violence and making communities work and grow, which is very much working with young people. I also established a collaboration with the Politecnico di Milano for the to work with the olfactory engineers and Queen Mary University, both for the human-computer interaction aspect, but also the public engagement. And as I said, the project was supported by the Heritage Electric Fund and CCHS. Now, what was really critical in the development of this project, which was quite successful, I had to say, it was to design a community-curated experience. The project was an experience for the people who participated, and had to be an experience for the people who would learn about it through art and the multisensory installation that we produced. So it became really important in order to do that, to identify appropriate ways of engaging people with the process of surfacing, negotiating, and reframing assumptions about diverse cultures. It became important to gain a better understanding of what tactile, gustatory, and olfactory experiences can be designed for in a community heritage context, and how they can provide space for intercultural exchange amongst researchers, artists, participants, and the public. And also to design an artistic experience based on the digital records elicited from the participants and then shared with policymakers, so that those who make decisions in terms of urban design could also get an understanding of what are these priorities for the people and the communities involved. In terms of outcomes, these were quite rich. I developed, following this methodology, I developed about 10 memory sessions, multisensory memory sessions with 43 members of the local Moroccan community. And through these memory sessions, I was able to identify what are the pillars of the intangible heritage for Moroccan people in the UK. I asked them to then record these memories associated, personal memories associated to these cultural artifacts or, items or things like a call for prayer, for example, that would be heard in Golborne Road because of the presence of the mosque there. And I asked people to record these memories on camera and self-edit themselves. So I told them you have a minute, between 1 minute and 3 minutes, to avoid my own editing so that people could be fully in charge of how the story would be told. We also had the opportunity to work on multisensory technologies and advance knowledge on multisensory technologies, especially the use of augmented reality, olfactory technologies in interdisciplinary space. So this was extremely important. The project was shared in something like 20 conferences around the world with computer-human interaction designers, digital humanists, etc. So this was very important. And then eventually an art installation, as I said, which demonstrated the potential of displaying community-sourced digital records and participatory knowledge production in arts, technology, and heritage events, both nationally and internationally. This is a photograph, a picture of the Zelig door on Golborne Road, which was the final outcome of the process in terms of the art installation. As you can see, we have a plexiglass print, a print on plexiglass of the map of Golborne Road. On the map, there are objects on the two sides. These little Moroccan pots have all those intangible and tangible elements that people talked about and discussed. And it could be just a comb, to comb hair of people of African, heritage. Obviously, this is something quite important. And there are rituals around that and around hair and combing hair, which are extremely important. Or it could be beads for prayer. It could be oranges. It could be the smell of mint. So you have all these different elements. And this is the map. And these elements are on the map. But how would you interact with this heritage is through an integrated frame. This is the design of a 3D print of a door, of a Moroccan door, which has at this top, as you can see, a pattern which is called Zelig. Zelig is a geometric figure which is widely used as a decorative pattern in Arabic architecture and design in general. And what we did was to use the pattern to basically allow the olfactory cannons that were hidden inside this frame and triggered by the the augmented reality software to be released in the moment in which people would then use the door and point the door on one of these, you can see these little tags. Yeah, so you have these little tags, which are QR codes, and by pointing the tablet hidden in the 3D print, which had the camera always on, then the olfactory display would, the olfactory cannons, the olfactory display would be triggered, as well as the video of the person who would have a memory about that specific cultural item. So as you can imagine, this became an extremely powerful tool for the people from Golborne Road themselves. Here we have one of the women who are from Golborne Road and was listening to a memory shared by someone else in the area. So it was the way in which, you know, Zygmunt Bauman would call this, the sociologist would call this, you know, the way of creating, you know, an encounter through art, the way of actually making communities in the way in which you share that heritage. So it's not just having the community at the source, but creating communities also to, you know, in the end, when you share the project. And you can also see here on the right how the Zelig door pointed on the marker would then release not only the olfactory, but also, as I said, the video of the person. In terms of dissemination and impact, the project was extremely successful. We took it to computer-human interaction in Denver in 2017 and had about 500 people queuing up to actually explore this little corner of London. And this shows the importance of community-curated experiences being taken to places where people can then gain from that learning and then use that learning in their own projects anywhere internationally in the world. The project also helped identifying cultural heritage priorities. The importance, for example, of the understanding the multidimensional quality of the heritage design space in sociocultural, aesthetic, and philosophical terms, especially when we work in a culturally diverse context. The importance of establishing collective curatorial and co-design practices that can create a direct connection and extension of the researchers' cultural space with that of the participants, opening new scenarios in critical heritage studies and urban planning. And also the importance of creating digital interfaces that computationally extend the cultural objects information that is acquired through the senses, with the view of moving from the objects to the space, time, and cultural significance that they embody. And this is extremely important when we deal with material culture. And this leads me to this second project I want to talk about, which in terms of material culture is really unique. And this is the Sloan Lab. The Sloan Lab was a 3-year discovery project that Julian Andrew ran between 2021 2024. Funded, it was part of towards the National Collection program, which is a major 5-year, was a major 5-year investment in the UK GLAM sector. This substantial amount of funding was provided through the Arts and Humanities Research Council to create a unified virtual collection in the UK and open the UK heritage to the world. Now, the Sloan Lab was particularly focused on reuniting the digital records of Sir Hans Sloane, who was a British physician, naturalist, and collector. And to give you a little bit of a background on Sloane collection, this was created from about 1680 until his death in 1753. It was basically collected from various parts of the world, and it was bought by the state on behalf of the nation and moved to the new institution at the time of his death, which was the British Museum. The collection includes an enormous amount of material. We talk about 50,000 books and manuscripts, 30,000 coins and medals, hundreds of thousands of natural history objects, hundreds of paintings, albums of prints and drawings, thousands of ethnographic objects and antiquities. And we have 40 original manuscripts, catalogs that were produced by Sloane and his assistants, and 5 of these have been transcribed and made accessible at the time of developing the Sloan Lab. So as you can imagine, this was a huge project, because what happened, you know, in over the centuries was that the collection was then split between the British Museum, the Natural History Museum, and the British Library, and research across the collection became incredibly difficult. So Sloan Lab had the opportunity to really engage with material culture, but through data rather than material culture. So looking at ways in which this material culture had been described in the original catalogs and then in the new catalogs created by the curators, and how this digital data could become interoperable in the digital space through the lab. Now, the challenge wasn't just a challenge in terms of, you know, the material itself, but also how to design this space of participation, which, according to Julian and Andrew, who obviously wrote the case for support, was a pillar in the development of the project. And why was it a pillar? Was a pillar not just because participatory methods have become really important in digital humanities, as we've seen before, but it's also because of the contested nature of the collection, because Sloane, over his life, benefited from transatlantic slave in transatlantic trade in humans. He acquired his objects not only through earnings as a physician, but also through profits from companies like the Royal African companies, the East Indian companies, who were involved in the transatlantic slave trade. His wife owned plantations in Jamaica. So all these obviously made the collection extremely relevant to communities coming from those areas. But at the same time, it was critical, crucial, important to find the right ways of engaging with communities and give them the opportunity to have a say in the way in which the lab would be designed and delivered. So in this context, you can imagine how an interdisciplinary research method became extremely important in identifying the participatory co-design mechanisms. I used, as a consultant, obviously, I used all of my tools, which included ethnography, participatory action research, knowledge of participation in performing arts, critical heritage studies, human-computer interaction. But because of the nature of the collection, I also started exploring the field of mycorrhizal ecology, which is basically the symbiosis between fungi and trees and forest networking. This was an important, interesting reference because it helped me understanding and unraveling really the complexities and in mutually beneficial relationships at an ecological level. And I try then to think about those in terms of social interactions. Now, the Sloan Lab co-design methodology obviously had at the core the key question, which was listed in the case for support of how can we involve members of the public, researchers, curators, and heritage organizations in machine actionable contextualization of individual objects and collections, enabling community source knowledge to enhance and even challenge existing Western derived descriptions and conceptions. This was a key element. And we worked around this key issue by designing a collaborative participatory approach, which would involve a range of actors in the co-design, the co-testing, and the co-exploration of the Sloan Lab. This helped us demonstrating how participatory design can lead to a new quality of human-centered design, human-centered digital heritage information-seeking environment, which is the lab, with the aim of fostering data-driven engagement with heritage collections, informing digital cultural heritage research and practice globally. And this is, again, the global element is extremely important because it's fundamental in terms of then redistributing knowledge across continents, especially for those who might not have the same amount of financial resources to engage with these issues. we also realized that, you know, participation, as we run the project, participation was not an add-on, but was really at the core. And this became so crucial. We are working currently, the three of us, on an article where we will be discussing more details, the participatory methodology. But this became also a way of developing a method within the project itself across the different participants in the project, the Natural History Museum, the British Museum, so that participation became a way not only to engage the external, but also internally those who worked on the Sloan Lab. And obviously at the core was also the importance of creating ethical frameworks of practice in both in relationship with obviously the research partners, but also the participants. So how did we engage in participatory co-design? Well, we engaged through a collaborative and iterative approach, which allowed us to understand community users and stakeholders' information needs, understand how and what they search, test the usability, challenge narratives, language, and colonial legacy, and also enhance research capabilities through interdisciplinary research. And here you can see photos of some of the activities that we ran at the Natural History Museum and at UCL with a diverse range of participants. Participatory, the activities that the participatory activities that we delivered are extremely wide. We had in-person workshops, focus groups, digital activities, UX focus groups. Towards the end of the project, we engaged Decolonizing the Archive, an organization which is particularly focused on African heritage, and they developed in collaboration with us the framework for a very important symposium on how to decolonize the Sloan Lab, which was attended by more than 100 people, plus ourselves, and was extremely important. And we also engaged online with people to gain information about the current uses of the collections, current interest, and we're talking about 200 people. So in all, we had something about 400 people engaging with the activities for the co-design of the lab. What did this allow us to do? It allowed us to make available online cultural sensitive material in historical collections, including both objects and or racially biased catalog descriptions. It helped us raise awareness of the project's work across multiple audiences, including the advisory boards organization and the partner organizations. And in terms of interdisciplinary research, we were able to advance research on accessibility, usability, and interoperability, and develop digital solution that responds to user requirements and motivations, and quality and usability expectations. The recommendations that come from the Sloan Lab in terms of, you know, the impact of participatory methods in co-design is that it's certainly important to develop nuanced understanding of working with collections as data, the context of the data, how that data was created in the first place. And this nuanced understanding will then help, you know, whoever decides to engage with the participatory method, identify the right people to work with you and the collections. The importance of acknowledging epistemological challenges when we work with biased historic collections using warnings, textual narratives. This is really important so that people, you know, when access material online, they can be, you know, the violence that is hidden behind certain definitions can be preempted at the beginning, so people can be warned. The importance of facilitating processes of working collaboratively with diverse range of participants. So collaboration is a pillar, but collaboration in a horizontal way rather than in a vertical hierarchical way when we work with communities. The importance of counteracting the siloed nature of collection data through interoperability. This is critical if we want to make, to advance, obviously, understandings of the collections, but also facilitate its use. The importance of including visual aids. Video tutorials became a really hot thing within Sloan Lab because it's a complex digital space, but also visualizations, graphs, diagrams, and so on. And obviously focusing on accessibility and making these links intuitive and accessible. So in the last minute, before we move to Q&A, where are we and what have we learned? We have learned that co-design of interface, the needs to include visualizations of collections and data. The importance of iterative reshaping of communications about collections and the language used in co-design process. Working at this scale and collaboratively with external organization is essential with all equally funded. Working at this scale and bringing together different specialisms and experiences, a relatively new approach for digital humanities project, but it worked brilliantly with the Sloan Lab. So it's an important lesson learned and something that we are very happy to transfer to others. And yes, this approach works and is transferable. So we are working on more academic outcomes, articles, as well as hopefully something that can be shared more widely with the GLAM sector. So that's me. Thank you so much for listening, and any questions, please, I'm here. I should stop.